Sexy Hiking was a game released in 2004 by Jazzo. Um, Basically, at the core of it, it was an incredibly DIY indie game in which all the assets, as far as I can see, looked like they were made in MS Paint. It was incredibly low budget and was just made because a dev somewhere had this vision, I guess. It was a really small kind of game that nobody really spoke about, and it had this really obnoxious core mechanic where basically you had this hammer, and the hammer would follow the mouse pretty much one to one. So you had to kind of hit the hammer off surfaces to gain momentum or send yourself flying in a certain direction, and you could use this to hike up the various parts of the level that the designer made. It was unintuitive, somewhat obnoxious, a little bit absurd, and just generally a really, really difficult game. This brings me to getting over it with Bennet Foddy. It's a physics platformer that Steam users have tagged rather appropriately as a psychological horror that has gained a ton of attention thanks to its challenging nature. And this should come as no surprise when you look at the dev, really. Bennet Foddy should be a somewhat familiar name within indie circles, mainly for his notoriously challenging browser game Quap, which I'm sure many of you have heard of. But with Getting Over It, I really kind of think he's struck gold in a sense. Your mission in Getting Over It is pretty simple. Just scale this mountain formed of somewhat absurd collage art using only a sledgehammer and while wearing a cauldron. You may think that the word wearing is an odd choice, but it's the only appropriate word choice really. You are literally stuck inside of a cauldron, and this is kind of a convenient way to explain why you can't just walk through certain sections, I suppose. You see, when talking about a game like Quap, it's almost impossible to really have much of a conversation outside of the sheer learning curve and awkwardness of the movement controls. But despite that, it has had its influence in a lot of indie games, for sure. By contrast, however, Getting Over It, while it does have its strange movement mechanic, it's not really a game about its movement mechanic as such. Honestly, I think the game is verging on being an absolute masterclass, really, in not only level design, but also in how to keep a player hooked in and just kind of wanting to press on regardless of the absurd challenges you kind of put in front of him or her. It achieves this fantastic balance between making things just hard enough that your first few attempts are kind of doomed to fail, and the narrator, Bennet Foddy himself, being just condescending enough for the player to kind of want to push through and just prove him wrong. Ultimately, this is a game made up of a bunch of platforming-style puzzles that require as much forethought as they do practice and execution. Every jump feels so thoroughly tested and tweaked to be as infuriating without ever making you feel like a certain part is impossible. You're always almost making a certain jump. You're always kind of almost pushing through a certain section. But I think one of the reasons this game has taken off so much is the insane tension that is presented at virtually every point in the game. You see, there are a lot of games that are incredibly challenging, but nowhere near as tense as this, because the entirety of Getting Over It is just a single map that goes up, and there are a ton of moments where just one tiny little miscalculation will just send you falling all the way back to the very start of the game. And you'd better believe that if you pick up this game, you're going to be very familiar with that opening section. But once again, the narrator will kind of always keep you motivated with maybe an inspiring quote, some slightly condescending music to either make you feel better about yourself or make you want to prove him wrong. It's kind of a really absurd balance he strikes in this sense. Another thing this game does really well that I feel like hasn't really been brought up a ton is teaching the player. I feel like it does a really, really good job of just explaining how to play the game via its level design. So at the start of the game, like I said, the movement controls are just incredibly awkward. You're going to feel like you're controlling an alien, effectively. It really won't feel natural at all. But, you know, as you kind of move along, you won't really fall too far in the first, 20 minutes or so of the game. You'll sort of just be getting used to how to move the mouse to get the momentum correct, how to, time things, how to, get used to panicking and not flipping out so you just throw yourself off a wall, that kind of thing. Also, a lot of the early challenges will kind of provide you an easier, mold of some of the later challenges, so you'll have a rough idea of what to do when you reach them, but you just kind of have a watered down version for now that you can get used to without losing a ton of progress in the process. But as I said before, as you get higher and higher, the tension increases at a very natural pace, because the more you progress, the more you have to lose, right? But despite that, I never feel like just quitting. Even if I did lose all of my progress, I was so used to the opening section by the end that I could normally just recover most of my progress in about 10 minutes or so, and it really wasn't that big a deal. As a result, all these elements combine to create this soul-inducing, incredibly compelling gameplay that while it is undeniably YouTube and streamer bait, it doesn't really lean on that in such a way that it could only ever really be defined as that, right? Like, it definitely carves out its own reason for, like, a player to play it. You know, if you watch it, you're not getting the same experience as when you play it, for sure. It's two really, really different things. My only real issues with the game are that perhaps a few sections are a little too punishing for where in the game they are, and I think the biggest offender of this is a section that is, you know, lovingly being called Orange Hell. Essentially, you'll reach it after probably about an hour and a half to 3 hours of play, depending on your skill level, and if you fall, there is a high chance you'll fall to the very starting area. That can get incredibly infuriating, especially considering that the jump you have to make to get out of Orange Hell, it's not the most easily recoverable one. If you fall off that jump, there's a high chance that you'll literally just end up virtually at the start of the game. The only other section that really was kind of a little bit over the top in my opinion was this section just before the end of the game. It's essentially a very steep, icy hill, and when you first see it, you're going to think that it's impossible to traverse. It just doesn't look like you could reasonably, you know, climb it. But after a little bit of kind of poking around and seeing what's up, you'll realise there are these divots in the mountain itself, and you can pretty much hook onto them and just, like, move onto each one. But they're, like I said, they're practically invisible. You literally can't see them. They're not modelled anywhere on the mountain as far as I can see. And I just think the decision to make these literally invisible was perhaps a little bit poorly thought out, because it ends up meaning this section that I understand you're supposed to be, you know, supposed to be teaching that you need to be slow and careful sometimes, and you can't just race through this, despite what the speedrunners say, I guess. But it's trying to teach you that, but at the same time, it just ends up being this really repetitive, trial and error style, mindless slog that will just crashes the game's pace to a complete halt, and it really just gets frustrating, honestly. Finally, I would like to say that while the game has an aesthetic for sure, I do feel like it's a little unremarkable despite some pretty cool collage-style level design. For example, there's an entire section that appears to be made of what I can only guess is sort of IKEA-style furniture, and it looks like he essentially thought of the puzzle, thought of the jumps he wanted you to make, and then fit the furniture into this mould as opposed to kind of just making a cool looking scene and then making a puzzle around it. It sort of seems like an interesting way to design something aesthetically. Also, the music is pretty cool. At times it's as dramatic as you'd want for a game this tense, but after you fall it's as condescending as the narrator's quips, and it really kind of again pushes you to want to just overcome the challenges it's laid out for you. Overall, I've got to say it's a really good game. I've really enjoyed it, and if you're a fan of these kind of challenging, punishing games, I'd highly recommend it. I think the pretty much Bennet Foddy put it best, that he made this game for a particular type of person to hurt them. That's something you'll hear in the trailer, and I mean, it's incredibly accurate. The psychological horror tag that Steam users have given it is pretty genius, because this game's going to have you pulling your hair out for sure. There are times you're just going to want to die, you're just going to want to give up on the game, but and then, you know, all of a sudden that condescending music kicks in, the narrator starts telling you, oh, it's okay, you can just try again. Everybody fails on their first try. It all just makes you want to push through and really overcome the challenge. So, you know, it swings and roundabouts, I guess, at that point. If you're into that, you'll definitely enjoy this game, I feel. I'd have to say, I really did enjoy this game. I'm feeling a 7 out of 10 on it. Most people have been reporting that runs last around 5 to 6 hours for your first try, and if you haven't looked on YouTube, you'll find a bunch of speedruns in the, you know, 2 to 3 minute margin, which is a true testament just to how skill intensive the game actually is. I will say that I am apparently just trash at this game. My first run took me 17 hours and 40 minutes, which from the people I've spoken to is a little absurd. You shouldn't really expect to take that long. Unless, again, you're just as trash as me. But again, it's a testament to the game that I just wanted to push through and keep playing. You can pick this up on Steam for £5.79, and I really hope you've enjoyed the video. Just before I close out, though, I just want to say I've started streaming on Twitch. I actually streamed the entirety of getting out of it as I played it, right up until the end anyway. I didn't want to spoil the ending. There's a little thing that the designer put in. And I won't spoil that here either. It's just a neat thing if you beat the game, basically. But if you're interested in seeing which games I'm looking at reviewing in the future or just want to hang, please follow the link in the description and follow the stream. It will let you know when I'm streaming, that kind of thing. It should give you a notification, I believe. I don't know that much about Twitch, to be honest, but I think that's how it works. I don't have a proper schedule right now, but I am planning on streaming at least twice a week for maybe, a few hours to 4, I don't know, something along those lines. Probably leaning towards evening times in the UK. And if you've enjoyed the video, please make sure to like, comment, and subscribe. Cheers for sticking around, guys, and I'll see you in another video or on a stream.
Because the objects in the stores are trash. I don't mean they look bad or that they're badly made, although a lot of them are. I mean they're trash in the way that food becomes